Welcome. This is the first video on this new channel, and as the title indicated, the motivation for this channel is to kind of look into the nature of being, and perhaps point to the fact that we may have lost sight of what is being, in line with what the great philosopher Martin Heidegger argued in his great book Being in Time. You see, essentially the worries that Heidegger had regarding technology, calculative thinking, infiltrating day-to-day life in such a way where our way of relating to the world and to each other became disordered in fundamental ways which were actually quite difficult to recognise or disentangle if you don't have your eye on the ball. And so, well, somebody might ask, well, what's wrong with the way the world is? Well, you have to look at certain aspects of society where things seem to be quite disordered. You have, in many places in the world, but from my perspective in Scotland, you have this drive for queering the classroom, queer theory in schools, which essentially is, from the roots of queer theory, the basis of queer theory is the sexuality of children, recognising child sexuality, exploring child sexuality, but in the place where challenging heteronormativity is one of the key things as well. And also the idea of teachers being able to bring their sexualities into the classroom. And one of the main motivations for queer theory in the classroom is to confuse and confound heterosexuality. I mean, 20 years ago, if you suggested to anyone, any local government council meeting, local council, parliamentary, UK Parliament, whatever, if you suggested you're going to go into schools and confuse and confound heterosexuality, or, which is probably, this is the worst one, is to talk about addressing the omission of childhood sexuality in the classroom, you'd be laughed out of the room, if not maybe arrested. But we've got to the stage now, today, where drag queens, adult entertainment acts are taken into Scottish schools for primary ones. The parents are not told about it, and when the government gets found out, they make a little bit of an apology. But journalists will write in national newspapers about, well, the parents are a bit homophobic, they're a bit bigoted. But anyways, it's parents that are the biggest abusers. That was one response to the queer theory infiltration in Scottish schools. I call this the dark defence. This dark defence seems to be tolerated very much so in our Scottish schools. And this is very surprising, because at the moment in Scotland you have this movement called the ACE movement, Adverse Childhood Experience movement. A loose movement. It's not. There's many different groups and ideas about it, but essentially, as I discussed in my interview with Richard Lucas in the Scottish Family Party on his YouTube channel, it's based on some retrospective research with adults talking about their childhood, and they came up with some very vague 10-point questionnaire to address neglect and abuse in childhood. And they've used this research to inform a risk preventative social policy. Very intrusive kind of risk preventative policy to target perfectly healthy children in schools and treat them as though they may have had adversity in their childhood, and therefore they will be cured. But it's this kind of therapeutic program in schools is very much based upon a humanistic model, where God is dead, so to speak, where man is the machine, the brain is a machine, cognitions, etc., are just things to be done to people or to be manipulated by people themselves. And it's done in a kind of group context where children get to speak about their worries in the classroom. And so essentially it's based on the encounter groups from the 1960s. And of course encounter groups can be quite problematic due to the people can feel coerced. The leader of the group can become quite totalitarian, and so this sort of atmosphere is being implemented in schools, and the ACE-aware movement are quiet. But more importantly, of course, there's no consent given. Consent for a human being, for any kind of psychological therapy to children is paramount. But the ACE-aware movement are silent. What about that adversity? What about that trauma? So these two layers of the psychological treatment centre for children in a school, and the queering the classroom in a school, on our most vulnerable portion of society, children, meets no resistance from mainstream politicians and very little resistance from mainstream press. And interestingly, these same ACE-aware nation, this ACE movement, are utterly silent on the fact that children are being asked to wear masks in the COVID era. I mean, the government policy of lockdown, for example, has created possibly a generation of complete and utter austerity for millions of people in the UK and the world, based on Neil Ferguson's model of 530,000 projected deaths in the UK if they didn't lock down. What have we had? Well, the figures are in Scotland are anywhere between 2,500 to 4,000, roughly in that zone, but of course there's big huge questions over the classification of deaths. And of course, under 65 years of age, with people with no health conditions, the risk of COVID is utterly minuscule. I mean, overall, the risk of COVID is minuscule. But yet we've shut the world economy. And all the great and the good, the psychologists and the statisticians and all these people are utterly silent. The cognitive dissonance is deafening. And so, I'll pick this up possibly in a part 2. For this is just a little introduction to the channel. But I'll recite the first few lines of a poem by Goethe, a German poet. This is the poem called The Holy Longing, which my supervisor many years ago, a guy called Noel Cobb, God bless his soul, he passed away a few years ago, but he was a huge influence in my life. He was a mentor, a supervisor, a friend, a guide. And I'll always remember he sometimes used to recite poetry to me when I used to go for supervision. And this is one of the poems that he introduced me to, The Holy Longing. I'll just give the first few lines, so I don't know off by heart, but it's called The Holy Longing. But it sums up, the first few lines sums up the predicament we're in today. It starts, tell a wise man, or else be silent, 'cause the masked man will mock you right away. Until next time, bye for now. So, this is part 2 of the introduction. I wanted to continue on from what I was talking about before, from the Goethe poem, and I think I will recite it in whole, because it's a very interesting poem, considering you know, this kind of salt and free speech and the lack of fearless speech that's going on in society. As I said, it's a pertinent poem, and especially in recent events for me, which I will go into in greater detail in another video, I think, very soon. But an article appeared in the Daily Mail on Saturday, an article about health professionals and doctors, etc., speaking contrary to the government narrative on COVID-19, the lockdown, masks, the vaccine, things like that. And this kind of targeting of people by the press in a kind of shaming way it's quite interesting what's occurring. I think a lot of people in all spheres of life, the medical profession as well, and the psychotherapy world, are very, very silent. Strangely, and I say strangely because, of course, psychotherapy or psychoanalysis is the practice where one is dealing with the challenge of being able to speak truthfully, honestly, to try to articulate what's on one's mind. And as Foucault has his problems, being one of the original kind of queer theorists, and he had ideas about lowering the age of consent for children to have sex, which was very, very problematic, I think, a big mistake by him. But he wrote a very interesting book called Parrhesia, which is Greek for fearless speech. And essentially in that book, he described how in ancient Greek culture, the role of someone to practice parrhesia, like a government advisor, or someone, anyone really, was a very important function in society. And when that is challenged, and when parrhesia is stopped or is not taken up, so civilization's not in a great way. The issue with parrhesia, as Foucault outlines in that book, is that speech, which is fearless, does carries a risk of offending someone. It carries the risk of upsetting people. But that's a necessary function of a civilized society. So when you get various elements, the government, the press, education, the medical profession, the psychotherapy profession, all dismantling, deconstructing the idea of fearless speech in many different ways and in very insidious ways, then we've got a big problem. We've got a big problem. And this Daily Mail article that featured me and a couple of doctors. I mean, it was a terrible article, and I said I'll go into it later in another video, but which it deserves a more detailed response. But essentially, it highlights this issue that journalists seem to have forgotten, and scientists, strangely enough, is that in science, of course, you're going to have people who, in the same discipline, like biology or physics or on medical specialities, who have different ideas of what the state of affairs are with their discipline in certain research matters and studies, etc. And the Daily Mail essentially wrote this article as though, well, if a doctor doesn't think vaccines are very helpful, or that the masks are will save you, or something, it's like the press have seemed to have taken that as a sin, a sin. But of course, even Sage, Chris Whitty of Sage, and people like that, they only a few weeks ago they said that masks were no good, and suddenly it's changed. But I think that change is not so much rooted in science, more in a political tactic. And so, parrhesia, fearless speech. I mean, the Daily Mail articles come at quite an interesting time of launching, my channel, and uh, I think it's spurred me on. I hope other people watching who've read the Daily Mail article and are watching other academics, doctors, health professionals, and people like that who are speaking up. I hope it gives them courage, because it's not a bad thing to disagree with the government at the end of the day, or disagree with the policy. I mean, as far as I remember growing up before COVID, all my life, I always remember political discussion, debate, and people disagreeing. It just seemed to be part and parcel of life. It was never a big issue. It never seemed to be a problem. But something strange is going on, as I say. The freedom of speech, and if you're not towing the party line, this kind of automatic shaming, I think extremely sinister. And I can't remember who, it was a member of parliament, and I apologise, I can't remember her name, but I'm sure you can Google it and find out. But at the top of my head I can't remember her name, but she sent some tweet and she said that something along the lines of, we shouldn't fetishise debate. That it's almost like it's not too great a thing, debating. We shouldn't get too carried away with thinking it's a useful thing. Goodness gracious me, I thought, we shouldn't fetishise debate. I mean, what's the point of the Houses of Parliament? The debating chamber, then? And I think it's very sad. Fearless speech has been extinguished slowly because people are in fear. I mean, I must admit, to be attacked in some way by the press or your place of work for saying the wrong thing, it can be a worrying thing. Of course it can. But I think we're in times now where we have to kind of transcend this fear, because if we don't, more and more freedoms will be eroded. So the birth of this channel's come at a very interesting time on the back of the Daily Mail article, and it's come at a time in this COVID brave new normal, and in a time where fearless speech is being eroded. What comes next? Well, in my next video I'm going to be discussing the Daily Mail article in detail, but I'll end now with the full poem by Goethe. It was translated from the German by Robert Bly, and it's a wonderful poem, and think about the words. It has so much resonance with our present times. So this is how it goes. Tell a wise person, or else keep silent, because the mass man will mock it right away. I praise what is truly alive, but longs to be burned to death. In the calm water of the love nights, where you were begotten, where you have begotten, a strange feeling comes over you when you see the silent candle burning. Now you are no longer caught in the obsession with darkness, and a desire for higher love-making sweeps you upward. Distance does not make you falter. Now, arriving in magic flying, and finally insane for the light, you are the butterfly and you are gone. And so long as you haven't experienced this, to die and so to grow, you are only a troubled guest on the dark earth. Till next time.